Welcome to the opening presentation of the 10th Annual Academic Symposium at Marian University. Our topic this year is freedom of speech versus civility. Where does the one end and the other begin? Before we go into it anymore, what I want to do is some housekeeping. As you came in, there were sign-in sheets. Please sign in if you have not already done so, especially if your professor is expecting you to attend. That a way for you to document that you did attend. There are also evaluation forms, and we appreciate you filling them out. I can guarantee you after 3 years on the committee, yes, they are looked at, and we do pay attention to what your comments are. They do help us improve the next year's symposium. And speaking of next year, in the area for comments on the evaluation, if you have a suggestion for next year's topic, please put it in. As soon as this 10th annual symposium finishes, we're off and planning for next year's symposium. So your suggestions for a topic will help us get off to a good start. We will have time for questions from the audience. There will be microphones available to ask your questions from. There will be members of the committee walking around with those. Please use the microphone. Our taping session, because of the technology, is only going to pick up your questions if you use the microphone. It will not just pick up from where you are right now. I'm John Weir, Director of the Healthcare Administration Program here at Marian. This year I've had the pleasure to also serve as Chair of the Academic Symposium Committee. An undertaking of this magnitude takes a lot of work by many people in order to be successful. What you'll see today, and tonight, and tomorrow would not have been possible without the effort of our committee members, who are, and I would ask that you're here, please stand and hold any applause to the ad. The members are Dr. Cheryl Ayala, Dr. Michael Ketterhagen, Dr. Aida McCloskey, Professor Vicki Hildebrandt, Professor Pat O'Connor, Mark Heimerl, Director of Sponsored Programs, student Andrea Fisher, Terry Drake, Assistant to the Executive Vice President, and the Executive Vice President, Dr. Ed Ogle. There's Pat O'Connor over there, and I think you probably ran into Mark Heimerl out as you came in. The objective of the symposium is to identify a significant and controversial topic and provide an opportunity for the university as well as the Fond du Lac community and surrounding area to discuss, debate, reflect, learn, and understand more on that particular topic. Past symposium discussions have covered such items as stem cell research, which was our first academic symposium, led by Dr. Cheryl Ayala, global warming, 21st century healthcare, and last year's topic is a university really necessary. We believe that this year's topic is equally significant for discussion. There are a couple people I do want to introduce. Stacy Akey is the Vice President for Recruitment Management. Very important for us. And we have the Dean of the School of Arts and Sciences, Jim Van Dyke, in the back there. Jim, thank you for coming. Okay, this presentation is on the historical perspective of civility. It's led by Dr. Richard Whaley's class, and at this time I will turn the floor over to Dr. Whaley.
I'd like to begin this morning by welcoming all of you to the symposium. The purpose of a symposium is to be a place where ideas are considered, debated, and reasoned discourse flows from them. And also very special thanks on the part of myself and Andrew, who will be doing the bulk of our determined that our focus is on the public, not private aspects of civility related to freedom of speech. The same, of course, goes for the handmaiden, or companion of civility, which is incivility. We'll define civility for our purposes as that which may be either the presence of an action in our public sphere, like congressional debate or views expressed at a town hall meeting. Further, it can be inaction, such as the refusal to take advantage of the opportunity to smear an opponent. Civility in speech thereby may either be spoken or shown by other media, internet, Facebook, and so forth, or unspoken in its manifestations. Civility in civil discourse is, for our purpose this morning, reflective of a state of mind which embraces toleration of ideas, rational dialogue, and thereby respects the social contract that binds our civil society together. Incivility, is to paraphrase 17th century English philosopher and political writer Thomas Hobbes, incivility is mean, nasty, brutish, and never ending. It is based on willful distortion of the ideas of others and misdirection of discourse by attention to personality, race, gender, sexual preference, or the creation of false paradigms to advance self-interest. From the earliest days of our colonial experience, the stated objective of public policy and politics has tended to mask the actual intention of those who carry forward the cause of incivility. Examples of this type of incivility include the idea of American exceptionalism, that God ordained the United States to be an exceptional nature relative to the rest of the world, which has become a mask then for us to do pretty much as we would like to do around the world. American exceptionalism, which ended up as being a mask for our own mad dash to remove the Indian peoples from their lands of European colonialism, and later American nationals could have it for themselves. Perhaps the most profound is the acquisition of our own set of colonies overseas following the Spanish-American War, and at home an endemic racism that was used to bind millions in the condition of slavery in order to enrich the Southern planter aristocracy in the condition of slavery, or to enrich the Southern planter aristocracy and New England textile mill owners before the Civil War, and is witnessed in our own time in voter suppression initiatives undertaken by numerous state legislatures. This cognitive dissonance in American history is what makes its study so very interesting. Whether we like it or not, incivility, more often than not, carries a day in American politics. We can witness this gridlock and deadlock going on in Washington over the past several years. Incivility is, as H. Rap Brown said, as American as cherry pie. And at this point, I'd like to talk a little bit about Andrew, who's going to pick it up here in just a moment. And this was just given to me literally seconds ago, so I'll read it as Andrew would like us to. So Andrew is majoring in history, graduating in December, finally. Areas of special historical interest: Revolutionary and early American era, Civil War, and progressivism in Wisconsin. He is enrolled in controversy class I teach in American history and New Deal. This is Andrew. Wait a minute here. Let's see. This is Andrew's 5th class with Dr. Whaley, who was quoted in the Fond du Lac Reporter recently describing Andrew as a courteous, well-dressed, eloquent, handsome, brilliant, insightful, capable, considerate, courageous, and scrupulously honest gentleman and scholar. He is a source of inspiration to people everywhere. Well, is that all right? Am I just reading?
Having this symposium at all is some indication that we are concerned about civility or a lack thereof in contemporary life. The topic of free speech and civility is a serious one, and it's an important one for all of us because we live in a country remember this when we exercise our rights. Before I go any further, I think it is useful if I am more explicit in what I mean by incivility in politics. Incivility is that which seeks to end dialogue or discourse prematurely by demeaning or insulting instead of engaging in argument or discussion. Dialogue is necessary to democracy. Heated argument and sharp disagreement are a sign of a healthy political culture. The freedom of expression essential to the vitality of democratic politics comes with a caveat. Freedom of expression comes with the responsibility to use it in such a way as to fulfill the publicly beneficial purpose for which it is intended. I think most of us would agree, just because I am free to be cruel and dishonest does not mean I ought to be. We have an obligation to use our freedom of expression to facilitate public debate and exchange of ideas necessary for a functioning political culture. My purpose this morning is to sketch an outline of the role civility has played in our national history, in order to give you some historical background on civility in the American political realm. In some ways, it should be reassuring to know that incivility has always been a part of American political life. Examples of incivility go back as far as war laws. While we may fret over the loose use of political labels today, you see examples of this with loose uses of the labels socialist and fascist. This is nothing new to the political scene. George Washington's Treasury Secretary was labeled a monarchist, as was President John Adams. Incivility in early American politics came in more than just the form of words. I'd like to give you a visual example to make this a little more concrete. An example of incivility emerged as early as 1798. A dispute between Congressman Ragged Matt, the Democrat Lyon.
Can we turn light down? Can everybody in the audience see that well, or can we dim the lights?
A little better? This is an image of a dispute between Congressman Ragged Matt, the Democrat Lyon, and Congressman Roger Griswold, which broke out into violence on the floor of the House of Representatives. After Griswold made a joke at Lyon's expense, referencing Lyon's court-martial for cowardice during the Revolutionary War, Lyon replied by spitting in Griswold's face. Historian Gordon S. Wood reports that 2 weeks later, in vengeance for this insult, Congressman Griswold appeared on the House floor brandishing a large cane and assaulted Congressman Lyon. Lyon responded by grabbing a pair of fireplace tongs, and the two men ended up wrestling on the floor of the House of Representatives. People at the time took this as a serious and ominous sign of the decline of politics, or politeness in politics and society generally. A few years later, opponents of President Thomas Jefferson went so far as to publish this cartoon, depicting Jefferson as a brandy-soaked anarchist, tearing down the pillars of government. Jefferson is saying, "Oh, I fear it is stronger rooted than I expected, but with the assistance of my old friend and a little more brandy, I will bring it down." He is shown in league with the devil, who is saying, "Pull away my son, don't fear, I'll give you all my assistance." It was one thing for Jefferson's opponents to say he was mistaken in the policies he and his party advocated. It was quite another for them to say he was a friend or tool or son of Satan. Another anti-Jefferson cartoon which I particularly enjoy is this one. Here we see the eagle of Providence preventing Jefferson from sacrificing the Constitution on the altar of Gallic despotism. Look in the bottom right, and once again, you will see President Jefferson's companion, friend, master, nearby. Jefferson's opponents painted him as a radical atheist determined to outlaw all religion in the U.S. and make America subservient to France. As if that were not enough to make him unelectable, this political cartoon went so far as to make him appear as an insane tool of Satan. To put it mildly, these two cartoons were not intended to facilitate rational discourse. Clearly, in the early days of the Republic, incivility was a part of America's political scene, and concerns about civility are nothing new. They're as old as our country itself. This is not meant to dismiss the seriousness of incivility, quite the opposite. We have to consider the warning of what examples of incivility provide to us about the fragility of our political system. The American political system proved incapable of resolving conflict in the run-up to the Civil War, and our political system broke apart at the cost of hundreds of thousands of lives. In the decades before the Civil War, the cause of temperance became popular. These groups advocated people drinking less. A speaker at a temperance society meeting admonished the group that such of us as have never fallen victims have been spared more from the absence of appetite than from any mental or moral superiority over those who had. Their self-righteousness deflated, he then proceeded to tell the group, to offer the group what I believe to be good advice about the most likely way to successfully engage those we disagree with. If you would win a man to your cause, first convince him that you are his sincere friend, and therein is a drop of honey which catches his heart, which is the great highroad to his reason. Once gained, you will find but little trouble in convincing his judgment of the justice of your cause, if indeed that cause really be a just one. The speaker then warned the group to address people in thundering tones of anathema and denunciation was about as effective at persuading them as trying to penetrate the hard shell of a tortoise with a ride straw. His advice was probably not heeded, because although the temperance movement lasted from the Civil War into the Great Depression, here is a temperance cartoon from around the time of the First World War. This cartoon did not so much support prohibition as denounced anyone who disagreed with them as wicked, terrible, they hate poor people, they are against progress. I mean, it's not meant to encourage debate. It's just, we hate these people. In light of this kind of a tendency in our politics, we must remember that what we say and do about one another, or what we say to and about one another, reflects upon our character. To criticize some policy or idea is not the same thing as demeaning someone. How likely are you to be persuaded by a person who insults you? How likely are you to persuade someone who you treat with disrespect? Saying someone is wrong and arguing your case for why they're mistaken or ill-informed is part of a healthy, vigorous debate in a political system. Saying someone is a stupid enemy of democracy and freedom is no argument worth the name. We need argument. We need criticism of opposing ideas. These things are good. What we don't need is the denunciation of those who disagree as wicked or malicious. Here's an excellent example of this. This is a Confederate portrayal of Abraham Lincoln authoring the Emancipation Proclamation. If you look closely at President Lincoln's inkwell, you will see that President Jefferson's friend and companion has returned. This should tell you how broken civility in our political system had become by the time of the Civil War. What possible discourse was encouraged by this type of denunciation? I wish I could tell you that later generations of Americans had learned their lesson about the fragility of our politics after the Civil War, but it would seem we have not. In the crisis of the Great Depression, examples like this were common, although they served no purpose in encouraging debate. It just simply labeled the New Deal the communist plot. If you look in the bottom corner, you will see, in the bottom left corner, you will see Trotsky And he's just delighted with what's going on in the United States. And in the right corner, you will see Stalin, who seems very optimistic about the prospects for communism in America. This does not encourage debate over whether the New Deal was a good policy. This doesn't do anything for what our politics ought to be. It just says the New Dealers are closet communists. I should point out that in all the criticism of President Roosevelt, though, it was still rare for his critics to go so far as to mention his disability. I think that is a redeeming point about the critics of the New Deal, in that they were civil sometimes. Here's another cartoon from the New Deal time. Dr. Roosevelt is attempting to treat the patient, Uncle Sam, with many different kinds of medicine. He isn't sure that what he's offering will cure the patient, but he isn't portrayed as acting out a communist plot either. A greater example of the contrast between incivility and civility can be found in these two cartoons. I think both are strongly anti-New Deal. I think both are strongly anti-Roosevelt. The one on the right is civil, whereas the other just makes Roosevelt out to be a friend of Joseph Stalin. And this is just a really good picture of some New Deal critics. Contemporary political debate, like that of the past, has elements of acrimony and rancor. I find this image to be particularly objectionable. What is the aim of this type of expression other than to make the president look dastardly? Is there a point in encouraging debate, discourse here at all? I think not. By contrast, look at this political cartoon. You or I may agree or disagree with what it intends to impart, but it makes its point in a respectful and engaging way. This cartoon does not label anyone as wicked, immoral, an enemy of freedom, or any other anathema. It engages the political debate and contributes a perspective to it. Robust political debate is a healthy thing for democracy, and thus, to some debate, incivility might be considered a necessary evil in a free society. However, incivility in the political realm is a dangerous fire to play with. Pointed rhetoric may be desirable for exciting interest in the democratic process of self-government, but to use the power of language and images to harm or make someone into an object of loathing is deleterious to the vigor of democracy. It risks driving people away from politics when the entire reason for democracy is to have the people do the governing through the political process. The use of language and images to engage in debate with one another is the lifeblood of free political institutions. What is freedom of speech for? It is not to empower us to denigrate one another, but to facilitate the interchange and discourse necessary for a reasonable settlement of our social disagreements. I believe, as the political scientist Larry Sabato, who tells his students, politics is a good thing. I take that to mean politics is a desirable way of solving our public disagreements because it is a peaceful one, however imperfect. The alternatives are presented to us in the majority of history. Indeed, one might go so far as to say that politics, in this sense, is absent from much of history. We need civility to strengthen our politics because politics is a more civil way of determining matters of conflicting public interest than by force. We can debate whether we are better served by this public policy or that, but it is unprofitable and in even wasteful use of free speech to cast reciprocal asseverations of wickedness at one another. We are best served by assuming the best intentions on the part of those we disagree with. It is one thing to conclude someone else is misguided or to point out the failings of some public policy. It's quite another thing to presume that those we disagree with must have malicious or selfish motives. If we expect our political system to function better, we must hold ourselves to higher standards of civility because our actions and words reflect back on us. To expect to persuade those we might disagree with by denouncing them or impugning their motives is to expect a reversal of human nature. After 4 years of being denounced as an evil, dictatorial, monarchical, and many worse things, Abraham Lincoln still advised charity for all and malice toward none. That is an example of political civility in U.S. history, which we all might profit by imitating today. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to your questions.
Any questions? Who's the first brave one with a question? Come on now.
I have one.
By the microphone.
Good morning. Here's my question. When you look at our times, particularly in your young life, what are the similarities and differences with respect to the American approach to civil discourse? I'd like to know what you think about it through the years. What do you think are some of the more significant trends that have lasted throughout the entire historical narrative that you provided us, and what has indeed changed in your view?
I think the most important aspect of the way our political discourse has been engaged in is people were willing to go very far in taking very heated and strong rhetoric against one another in the political realm. But it was very rare to go after someone's personal life, even though there were a lot of examples of very vulnerabilities in their personal life, you might say. But that has changed. It seems today the personal is very much part of the political game now, in a way that it didn't used to be. And I don't think we're better off for it. Is that kind of what you're looking for?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other? Just a second.
Andrew, do you think that capitalism garners some of this incivility? Most of those cartoons you showed were from newspapers, and they do that to increase sales.
Maybe. It's not as if rudeness is unique to our economic system at all. But in some ways, I think because it has the potential for serious financial reward by being so sensational at times, it does kind of cultivate it. You know, there's an audience for it, and that's our fault because we're willing to look at those cartoons, we're willing to read those newspapers and buy them. We encourage it, and it's our own fault.
What do you see as the cause for the political discourse in the United States? A flaw in the system of democracy or in the moral fiber of the people? And how could you reform it?
Are you asking what do I see as the failings of our political discourse and what's the cause of those? All right. I don't think there are any simple answers to that. I think there's no we have to engage ourselves in civility in our political system, and we have to be willing to criticize one another civilly and to also criticize the people who engage in incivility. And I don't think there's enough being hard on one another over this. I think a lot of people get away with it, and it's a successful political tactic. I mean, everyone says they hate negative advertising, but it works. And we let it work. Maybe we should.
I think I'll jump in here. I was at a meeting last fall, and we had some people from National Review in, John Funn, Bob Costa. And one of the things, piggybacking on your aspect of, the commercialism it sells and the negativity, Bob Costa was talking about being on panels with Reverend Al Sharpton and being at definitely different points of view with Reverend Sharpton. And he was talking about the process where when they were discussing things that there was this impasse, shall we say. And when the lights went off and they had to wait until, they got back on air again, they had the little earpieces from the control room. And on more than one occasion, they were told, liven it up. And so it was really the process of creating the, shall we say, the discourse or the incivility of the discourse that was being promoted by the very network. And I think the other thing that John Funn said was it's very difficult when you're having a discourse and you look at the other person and you call them a liar. It seemed to cut off debate at that point there. But it really was something that just struck home in terms of the commercialism that you see on TV with panels, with people. He said, when the light is off, Reverend Sharpton and him are very good friends. They talk very amicably. When that red light for the camera goes on and they're told to liven it up, it gets to be very adversarial. Would you want to comment some more about the commercialism?
No, I thought your example was really good.
Other questions? I thought I saw a hand.
All right, this kind of goes to both of the last two questions that just got asked. Who do you believe is most at fault for incivility? Jeremy mentioned small-town newspapers will print these ads, but at the same time we have our two political parties basically just bashing each other intentionally. Or is it us for begging, basically begging for incivility? So who is at fault?
I think there's a little bit of all three, but you kind of hinted at what I believe to be the most correct answer, the last point you made about that we ask for it, and we get what we ask for, and we're willing to pay for it.
Hello. Earlier you were saying that we in politics have become a little bit more personal. And my question was, do you believe in being in politics that personal lives shouldn't be brought to light? Don't we as people have the right to know who's leading us, good and bad?
Yes, but that's not the same thing as using someone's personal life for your own political purposes simply to destroy them. We have a right to know who we're represented by, and we have a right to know about their lives. But there's a line where you have to respect someone's privacy. And I think there's just been a complete disregard for that line.
You bring up the point about there has to be a line where your private, personal does not need to be brought to light. So are you suggesting that the truth has to be tempered with civility? Are you saying that there are certain things about a person's personal nature that don't necessarily affect their ability or right to lead? Or are these things just people say all the time, I am who I am because of where I've been. So when I think about what you say there, and I bring up the thing about FDR, and they never attacked his disability. But I think in today's day and age, with how the president has to be everywhere at all times, and he works 20-hour days, do you think we would ever elect a president with a disability today? We don't even elect one that's bald. They tell you all the time, you gotta have hair to be president. Where do we draw the line? What part of the truth can be kept back for civility's sake? And where do we say that this is something that has to come out, no matter how negative it is?
You have to ask the question, is it pertinent to their ability to fulfill their role as a representative? And how big of an impact does it make on their ability to do it? That's the way I would look at it. Your example of the way President Roosevelt was treated then, I think is spot on. You're right. There's a certain superficiality to our politics today, where you have to be 6 feet tall and have your hair and things like that in order to be electable as president. I don't think we're necessarily well served at all by that in our politics, but it's there. And I really doubt whether we could elect a guy like Roosevelt today, much less a guy like Lincoln, who everyone thought looked awkward and sad and everything. It just didn't happen.
I'll show my age a little. I remember when Tom Eagleton was a candidate, and it was found out that he had been hospitalized, and he had to withdraw. And I think that's, it's been going on for a long time. This is not something new. As Dr. Whaley has pointed out to me, we've had lots of incivility way back when, even before my time. And I think it's especially important today, and I bring up Tom Eagleton because I am concerned about mental health and the stigma attached to it. But it was just rampant the minute that came out. The media picked up on it, and he had to withdraw. Had maybe nothing to do whatsoever with his capabilities as a candidate. But it was just the stigma out in the politics that really made that. Other questions? Got to be something else here. Go ahead. Into the microphone.
I'll just make one more comment on that then. It seems that we understand that there are things that our media brings out that are completely irrelevant to a person's ability to lead. But in the day and age that we live, with the media the way it is and how intrusive it is, it seems that the only answer then is to hide certain things about our personal nature to prevent it from getting out, so that these things that wouldn't affect our ability to lead at all don't become front and center because they don't affect our ability. But then it seems we will have to walk a very thin line between what we reveal and what we hide. And I think most proponents of an intrusive media, that would be their argument. When you hide one thing, what else are you hiding? So we're doing a bad job of balancing, I think, civil discourse and negative campaigning. But I think there are two sides to it that really do need to be addressed. So I just wanted to make that point.
Any other questions? Observations? Doesn't have to be a question. Anything that you're thinking of?
I think you just made a point, and makes me think, by having this much incivility in our politics, we are probably actually losing out on some very talented people who would otherwise get into it. And they just say to themselves, why would I put myself through that? And every time you watch a talk show that has that kind of thing in it on TV, whether you like it or not, you're endorsing that because you are helping improve that television's ratings. This is just not a healthy thing to do.
If I could just add something that I've asked my American government class, virtually every class I've taught since 1993 here at Marian. And I asked them, how many of you would ever be interested in running for public office? And almost invariably, the response from the class is no one, or maybe one. I remember once I was pretty happy for them. Got to shake two of them out of a tree and actually try to do that. But I mean, that's what, in essence, what I think, Andrew, you've been talking about, is what we've allowed our politics to become, because we get the type of politics we want. In a democracy, we are the government. We have that power to determine how it will work and who will govern us. And I think Andrew has done a very good job this morning in pointing out that if you want the smear and the gutter politics and tolerate it, that's what you'll get. But if you start voting against the people who are doing that, that behavior will stop very, very, very quickly. So American politics is just a fascinating study because Americans have sort of this schizoid view of themselves as generous, kind, compassionate, except when it comes to government, we're not. We really do like our gutter bravado and gutter politics, because that's what we do, we practice. And the amount of incivility, to me as an historian, that we see today is like nothing we have ever witnessed or experienced before in American history. Absolutely nothing. To the point to prove the virtue of their argument, one side, for example, in the Senate routinely filibusters, or in House of Representatives will take no action on a piece of legislation, such as, for example, following the tragedy of Newtown, Connecticut, where 92% of the American public favor a background check for, or background check before you can buy a gun, a weapon. And yet, the political process is incapable of even responding in any kind of a timely manner to the will of the people. And so my concern, John, would be that when you have a system that becomes that dysfunctional, we should be aware that history has all kinds of examples of what happens in that society. and that in our own time we have seen major upheavals and revolutions, or worse yet, that people just walk away from the public part of their lives and allow that to fall to the very worst people imaginable. So we have to be very careful here. I applaud John and Cheryl Ayala when they said, can you come to a meeting and talk about whether or not you'd like to be a participant in it? And I heard them out, and I was sitting there thinking, these people have taken leave of their senses. This is just a topic that nobody's going to pay attention to. And I got to thinking about it later that day, thinking, this is really a stroke of genius. Because this is an extremely important topic, because that lack of civility is something that just eats and gnaws, subverts, undercuts, and destroys your whole democratic process. And it's how we handle it. Sometimes we've lost our sense of humor here. That's how we respond to politics. Let me give you a classic example. What I think is how we should handle some of this stuff, and it was by Abraham Lincoln during the Lincoln-Douglas debates. So Lincoln was accused by Douglas of being two-faced, that is, disingenuous and lying and so on and so forth. And Lincoln looked at Douglas and said, do you think if I was two-faced, I would wear this one? So there's no humor here anymore. We got to lighten up just a little bit and see if we can't impose, or I shouldn't say impose, but bring back, because it has to come from us, to bring back a degree of civility that's lacking in its entirety.
Well, before Sister Donna, I will add a little something to what Professor Whaley has said. It was no stroke of genius. It was basically the reason you were here, and I know Sister Donna has been so involved with the symposium, but that's the process that we're talking about. The reason that you're here is maybe through a little bribery, through a little coercion, but maybe it's you are interested in what's being said here. And if you can leave here with the philosophy of the symposium to discuss and debate and reflect and learn and understand, then I think there's hope for us. Because it's only going to come from here. A Third Circuit Court judge that's on the brochure talked about civility. And as Rick was saying about the legislature, we are lazy people. We expect the courts to help us out. We expect other people to do things for us. And at the end of the day, what this judge said is, the courts aren't going to help you out on this. You have to decide this for yourself, and the best place in order for you to investigate this and decide for yourself is in the university, to learn, to debate. And so that's what this whole process is about. And if we can leave here with this session alone, with that in our mind, I think we are successful. Sister Donna, I hope I am not stealing your thunder, but you've been so involved with the symposium over the years. Please add.
I'm just one faculty member who was involved at some point along the way, and it's wonderful to see it evolve every year. I'm hearing an echo. I don't know if anybody else is standing. My doctoral class last Thursday night in Appleton had a discussion on as philosophy of education. And one of the things that came up was the Tammy Baldwin ad last year with the election. Now, we don't know how many times she really said that word. You know all the word? You all know the word I'm talking about? See, here's the sisters saying, damn right, okay? So how many times did she say that word? Probably not all the times we heard it in the ad, right? So one of the discussions was, or in the discussion, how do we, our responsibility on things, and once something gets out there, because once she said that to one group, then it was picked up, and it was in the ad, and actually the part of the discussion was maybe it helped get her elected, because that ad was played so often, people got kind of frustrated with it. So we don't know how it really impacted the outcome. But then we got into the discussion about all the media today and things that people can be putting online and how everything we do is out there for information. And so somebody can do something when they're 18, and then if they want to run for office when they're 28, or the Eagleton example you gave, puts it out there that what he did needed for a brief point in his life changed and could never go away the rest of his life. So then we got into the discussion about forgiveness. Because as we as a society evolve in a way, are we moving to a point that things that would have been private before? Look at Jefferson, when you saw with him, he had a whole private life that a lot of people maybe didn't know about. But things that now have, well, we know things that come out, but they were private at the time. Or a lot of people might be reading what Lincoln wrote, but didn't maybe really know what he looked like, or hadn't seen him moving or whatever. Now, we're moving, so anybody here who wants to run for office at some point in the future, anything could be public that's out there in the media. But the doctoral student's point was that are we moving to a point that we really forgive people? We'll understand that there are times we have a weak area in our life. There are times we need assistance. There are times we need special medications or special help. Or we just make stupid mistakes. And we're human, and then we move on. And I've been reflecting how that's really what we're about as a Catholic institution, that to understand that basic forgiveness. And I think a lot of, religions and as a society, if we can get to that, it's the core of who we are. And if we understand our own weaknesses and can be forgiving of other people, as a society we'll move to a new point. So I'm just sharing that because it connected back, thinking about all the changes that have happened over the years.
Thank you, sister.
Okay, just one thing for my students. John, I want you to know this involves both bribery and coercion. You were today. So if you wouldn't mind coming down after we're done here, I have a sign-in sheet for you for your attendance points, so please do that. We'll discuss this a little bit in class on Thursday. I just very impressed with Andrew's presentation. He did a very good job, and I want to thank you all for your participation here. Now John has some concluding comments.
Rick knows I love movies and TV and things like that. I remember one show that started out with a comment, which was, democracy is a very imperfect form of government, but it's the best form that we've found so far. So we're still looking. We recognize it's imperfect, and we have to look to get rid of some of the imperfections. I thank you for your time today. If you haven't signed in, please sign in. If you haven't done the evaluation, please do the evaluation and look at the brochure for other presentations. We would love to see you in other presentations throughout today and tomorrow. And the Paddlecon does have a clipboard back there that can be used. So again, thank you, and we look forward to having you in other presentations.